The blood-red sun sank behind the jagged horizon of Coyote Ridge, casting long shadows over the dusty main street of Willow Creek, a frontier town that had seen its fair share of violence since its founding in 1878. Frances Lawson stood frozen on the wooden porch of her family's general store, her cheek still stinging from her brother's first slap as his hand rose again, fury twisting his features into something unrecognizable. The second blow never landed. A sun-bronzed hand shot out from nowhere, gripping her brother's wrist with unmistakable strength. "No more," said a deep voice that rumbled like distant thunder. Frances's eyes darted to the owner of that voice, a tall stranger with dust-covered boots and eyes the color of a summer storm. The cowboy didn't release her brother's wrist as he spoke, his words measured but firm. "That's no way to treat a lady." Walter Lawson, Frances's older brother by 4 years, yanked his arm free and squared his shoulders. At 26, he'd grown accustomed to running the family business and his sister's life since their parents' death 2 years prior. "This ain't your concern, stranger," Walter spat. "Family business." The tall man adjusted his hat, revealing dark hair and a face weathered by sun and wind. "I make it my business when a man raises his hand to a woman in the street." Frances found her voice, though it trembled slightly. "Please, sir. My brother is just teaching you respect," Walter finished, his eyes narrow slits of anger. "After catching you mooning over that worthless Thompson boy again." The stranger's gaze never left Walter's face. "Name's Noah Yates. Just rode into town looking for work and a place to rest my head. Didn't expect to witness a man striking his kin in broad daylight." A small crowd had begun to gather, and Frances felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. At 22, she was old enough to make her own choices, but Walter had grown controlling since inheriting their father's position as head of the family and proprietor of Lawson's general store. "Walter, please," she whispered. "People are watching." Something in her brother's expression shifted. He was many things: stubborn, quick-tempered, overprotective, but he'd always been mindful of appearances in town. The Lawsons were respected merchants, after all. "This isn't over," Walter muttered before turning to Noah. "And you'd best find somewhere else to look for work, cowboy." As Walter stormed back into the store, Frances touched her cheek, still warm from the impact. "Thank you, Mr. Yates, but you shouldn't have interfered." "He'll be worse now once everyone's gone." Noah's expression softened slightly. "Madam, no man has the right to strike a woman, kin or not." His eyes, gray as a winter sky, studied her face. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing that won't heal," she answered, attempting a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But you don't understand. Walter's been different since our parents died. The responsibility weighs on him." "Responsibility doesn't excuse cruelty," Noah replied, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Miss Frances Lawson, my brother and I run the general store." She gestured to the building behind them. "Miss Lawson, I meant what I said. I'm looking for work. Been riding with cattle drives for years, but I'm aiming to settle somewhere for a spell." Frances tucked a strand of honey-brown hair behind her ear. "After what just happened, I doubt my brother will hire you." "Wasn't asking your brother," Noah said with the ghost of a smile. "Sheriff's office down that way," Frances nodded, surprised by the man's calm demeanor. Most drifters passing through Willow Creek were rougher around the edges, more volatile. There was something steady about Noah Yates that made her curious despite herself. 2 buildings down on the left. Sheriff Miller might need help. "He's been complaining about needing a deputy since Jimmy Fletcher left for California." Noah touched the brim of his hat. "Much obliged, Miss Lawson." He hesitated, then added, "If your brother raises his hand to you again, you find me." Frances watched him walk away. his tall frame moving with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to handling himself in difficult situations. She knew she should go inside, face Walter's continued anger, but instead, she found herself lingering on the porch, watching Noah Yates until he disappeared into the sheriff's office. That night, Frances moved quietly around their living quarters above the store, preparing dinner while Walter tallied the day's receipts at the small oak table in their kitchen. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the scratching of his pencil and the occasional clink of cooking utensils. "He found work with Miller," Walter finally said, not looking up from his ledger. Frances paused, knife hovering over the potatoes she was cutting. "Who did?" "Don't play dumb with me, Frances. That interfering cowboy. Sheriff hired him as deputy this afternoon." Walter's pencil pressed so hard against the paper that the tip broke. He cursed under his breath. "It's not my concern who Sheriff Miller hires," she replied carefully. Walter finally looked up, his eyes the same hazel as her own, dark with warning. "Stay away from him. He's trouble. You don't know anything about him. I know his type. Drifter with a fast draw and a hero complex." Walter closed the ledger with finality. "You've got responsibilities here, to this store, to our family name. I won't have you running around with another unsuitable man." Frances felt a flare of rebellion. "Like Patrick Thompson. He's the blacksmith's son, Walter. Hardly unsuitable." "He's penniless with no prospects," Walter snapped. "And now you're defending that cowboy too. He stopped you from hitting me in public," Frances shot back before she could stop herself. "Something Father would never have done, no matter how angry he got." The mention of their father silenced Walter momentarily. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter but no less intense. "Father didn't understand what it takes to keep this family respectable. I do." Later that night, as Frances lay in her narrow bed, she found herself thinking about Noah Yates. There had been something in his eyes beyond the simple chivalry of a stranger intervening in a public dispute, a depth of understanding, perhaps even recognition. As if he knew what it meant to be trapped. She touched her cheek, the sting long gone but the memory fresh. Walter had never struck her before today, though his temper had grown increasingly unpredictable. What would happen next time, when there wasn't a stranger to step in? The following morning brought clear skies and the promise of a busy market day. Frances was arranging a display of canned goods when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up, her greeting freezing on her lips as Noah Yates stepped inside, now wearing a deputy's badge on his vest. "Morning, Miss Lawson," he said, removing his hat. In the morning light streaming through the windows, she could see his features more clearly, the straight nose, strong jawline, and those remarkable gray eyes framed by smile lines that suggested he laughed more often in different circumstances. "Deputy Yates," she acknowledged, acutely aware of Walter watching from behind the counter. "What can we help you with today?" "Sheriff asked me to post these notices," he replied, producing several papers from inside his vest. "Town meeting next week about the railroad proposals. Thought your store would be a good place for folks to see it." Walter stepped forward. "I'll take those." Noah handed the notices over without comment, but his eyes briefly met Frances's. "Everything all right today, Miss Lawson?" The simple question carried weight beyond its words. Walter's jaw tightened. "Perfectly fine, thank you," she answered, forcing brightness into her voice. Noah nodded once, seemingly satisfied. "Sheriff mentioned you might have some supplies put aside for the office. Ammunition and such." Walter's posture relaxed slightly at the shift to business. "Yes, we keep the sheriff's orders separate. Frances, fetch the crate from the back room." Grateful for the excuse to escape the tension, Frances hurried to the storeroom. When she returned struggling with the heavy wooden box, Noah immediately stepped forward to take it from her. "Allow me," he said, his fingers brushing against hers as he took the crate. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her hands. "It's heavier than it looks," she warned. "I've handled worse," he replied with a hint of a smile. Walter cleared his throat loudly. "Will there be anything else, Deputy?" "Not today." "Much obliged for the help." Noah adjusted his grip on the crate and nodded to Frances. "Miss Lawson." As he turned to leave, Frances noticed something she'd missed before, a long scar that ran from just below his right ear down into his collar. The mark of a knife fight, perhaps, or some other violent encounter. It was a reminder that this man, for all his polite manners, had likely seen his share of trouble. The rest of the day passed slowly, with Walter growing increasingly irritable as customers peppered him with questions about the new deputy. Willow Creek was small enough that any newcomer generated interest, but a handsome single man who'd already shown himself willing to stand up to one of the town's businessmen was particularly noteworthy. "Did you see how Mary Wilson was simper?" Walter muttered as they closed up shop that evening. "You'd think she'd never seen a man before." Frances said nothing, arranging jars of candy on the counter for the next day. She'd noticed Mary's interest in the new deputy, and for some reason it had bothered her more than it should have. "I hear he's staying at the boarding house," Walter continued. "Mrs. Jenkins says he paid for a month up front. Seems he intends to stay a while." Frances couldn't help her curiosity. "Did Mrs. Jenkins mention where he came from?" Walter's eyes narrowed. "Why do you care?" "Just making conversation," she replied, keeping her tone light. "Well, don't," Walter snapped. "And I meant what I said about staying away from him. The last thing we need is people gossiping about you and another unsuitable man." Frances pressed her lips together to keep from arguing. Ever since Patrick Thompson had asked to court her 6 months ago, Walter had been increasingly controlling. The fact that their father had always liked Patrick seemed irrelevant now. Walter had decided the blacksmith's son wasn't good enough for his sister, and that was that. "I'm going to bed," she announced, unwilling to endure any more of Walter's sour mood. "We're having dinner with Reverend Simmons tomorrow," Walter called after her. "He's bringing his nephew James from Denver." Frances paused on the stairs. "Why?" Walter's smile didn't reach his eyes. "James is taking over his father's banking business. He's looking to invest in promising frontier towns, and he's unmarried." The implication was clear. "I'm not interested in meeting eligible bachelors, Walter." "You'll come to dinner and be pleasant," Walter said, his voice hardening. "It's time you started thinking about your future. A respectable future." Frances continued up the stairs without answering, anger burning in her chest. Her brother was trying to marry her off to secure business connections, just another item to be bartered in the general store. The next morning broke with ominous clouds gathering on the horizon. Frances opened the store while Walter went to arrange details for the dinner with Reverend Simmons. The approaching storm meant fewer customers, giving her time to think. She needed to find a way to assert some independence without provoking Walter's temper further. The bell above the door jingled, pulling her from her thoughts. She looked up to find Noah standing in the doorway, shaking raindrops from his hat. "Storm's coming in faster than expected," he said by way of greeting. Frances nodded, oddly pleased to see him. "Can I help you with something, Deputy?" "Noah, please," he said, placing his hat on the counter. "And yes, actually, I need a few things for my room at the boarding house." "Mrs. Jenkins means well, but that place is drafty as a barn." Frances smiled despite herself. "Mrs. Jenkins has been promising to fix those windows for years. What do you need?" "An extra blanket. Maybe some of that coffee you've got there." He gestured to the shelf behind her. and whatever else you'd recommend for a man living in one room with minimal cooking skills. As Frances gathered the items, she found herself relaxing in Noah's presence. He had an ease about him that invited conversation. "How are you finding Willow Creek so far?" she asked. "Quiet," he replied. "Which is what I was looking for. Where were you before this?" The question slipped out before she could stop herself. Noah seemed to consider how much to share. "All over. Drove cattle from Texas to Kansas, worked as a ranch hand in Colorado, did some scouting for the Army." He paused. "Spent the last year in Dodge City as a deputy there." Frances raised her eyebrows. "Dodge City has quite a reputation." "That it does," Noah agreed, a shadow crossing his face. "That's partly why I left. Needed somewhere with less shooting and more sleeping." "Well, Willow Creek should suit you then," Frances said, setting his purchases on the counter. "Most excitement we get is when Mr. Peterson's prize bull gets loose." Noah chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. "Sounds perfect." He reached for his coins, then hesitated. "How's your cheek?" The unexpected question caught her off guard. She touched her face automatically, though the mark had faded. "Fine, thank you for asking." Noah's eyes held hers for a moment too long. "Has he tried again?" Frances glanced toward the door, ensuring they were alone. "No, but he's—" She trailed off, unsure how to explain her brother's controlling behavior to a stranger. "Found other ways to express his displeasure." Noah finished for her. She nodded, surprised by his perception. "He's arranged a dinner tonight with a banker's son from Denver." Noah's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "I see. It's not." Frances struggled to explain. "Walter thinks he's doing what's best for me, finding me a suitable husband with prospects." "And what do you think is best for you, Frances?" Noah asked quietly. The use of her first name startled her, but not unpleasantly. "I think I should have the right to decide that for myself." Noah nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. "That seems reasonable enough." He gathered his purchases, tucking them under his arm. "Thank you for the supplies." As he turned to leave, Frances found herself not wanting him to go. "Noah," she called, surprising herself with her boldness. "Why did you really leave Dodge City?" He paused, his hand on the door. For a moment she thought he might not answer. Then he turned back, his expression serious. "I shot a man," he said simply. "He deserved it, was beating his wife half to death in the street, but he was also the mayor's cousin. Some folks thought I should have found another way to stop him." His jaw tightened. There wasn't one. The confession hung in the air between them. Frances found herself nodding slowly. "I understand. Do you?" His eyes searched hers. "Yes," she said softly. "Sometimes there aren't easy answers." Something passed between them then, a moment of recognition that transcended their brief acquaintance. Noah touched the brim of an imaginary hat, his actual hat still in his hand. "Good day, Frances," he said. And then he was gone, the bell announcing his departure. Frances stood motionless behind the counter, her heart beating a little faster than normal. There was something about Noah Yates that called to her, perhaps his directness, or the quiet strength he carried. Whatever it was, she knew with sudden clarity that she wanted to know more about him, despite the complications it would surely bring. The rain began in earnest as evening approached, drumming against the roof as Frances dressed for dinner. She chose her plainest dress, a muted blue cotton that did little to enhance her appearance. If Walter wanted to parade her before some banker's son, she wouldn't make it easy for him. Walter frowned when he saw her. "Couldn't you wear the green one? The one with the lace trim?" "This one's more practical for a rainy evening," she replied, adjusting her simple cameo brooch. Walter looked like he might argue, but a knock at the door announced their guest's arrival. "We'll discuss your wardrobe choices later," he muttered as he went to greet Reverend Simmons. Dinner was precisely as tedious as Frances had anticipated. James Simmons was a pale, thin man of about 30 with spectacles and a nervous habit of clearing his throat before speaking. He had clearly been coached by his uncle to show interest in Frances, as he periodically asked her questions about her feminine pursuits before launching into lengthy explanations of banking regulations. The frontier represents an unprecedented opportunity for capital investment, he was saying, while Frances pushed her food around her plate. With the railroad expansion, towns like Willow Creek could see exponential growth. That's exactly what I've been telling the town council, Walter agreed enthusiastically. Frances, more potatoes for our guests. Frances dutifully passed the serving dish, her mind wandering. She wondered what Noah was doing this evening, reading, perhaps, or sharing stories with Sheriff Miller. The thought of his gray eyes and the way they seemed to see right through pretense made her smile slightly. "Miss Lawson finds something amusing?" James asked, looking confused. Frances composed her features quickly. "Just remembering something from earlier today." "Please, continue about the banking regulations." James puffed up slightly. "Well, as I was saying, proper collateral is essential for—" The rest of the evening dragged on endlessly. When the Simmons finally departed with promises of future social engagements, Frances began clearing the table immediately, hoping to escape to her room. "He liked you," Walter said, loosening his collar as he settled into his armchair with a glass of whiskey. "He hardly knows me," Frances replied, stacking plates, "and I certainly don't know him." "That's what courtship is for," Walter said dismissively. "James has excellent prospects. His father owns banks in 3 territories. Frances set the plates down harder than necessary. "I don't care about his father's banks. I don't care about James Simmons at all." Walter's expression darkened. "You need to be practical, Frances. What do you think your options are here? Patrick Thompson with his dirty hands and uncertain future. Or perhaps you've set your sights on that interfering deputy now." Heat rushed to Frances's cheeks, betraying her before she could formulate a denial. Walter noticed immediately, his eyes narrowing. "So that's it," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "One act of misplaced chivalry and you're mooning over him like some lovesick schoolgirl." "You don't know what you're talking about," Frances protested, but her burning face undermined her words. Walter stood, setting his glass down with deliberate care. "Listen to me very carefully, sister. Noah Yates is a drifter with a gun and a badge. Men like him don't settle down. They move on when trouble finds them, and trouble always finds them." "You know nothing about him," Frances said, anger overriding her usual caution. "I know his type," Walter retorted. "And I know that as long as you live under my roof, you'll respect my judgment. James Simmons is coming to call on Sunday after church. You will receive him graciously." Frances straightened her spine. "And if I refuse?" Walter's smile was cold. "Then perhaps it's time you found other accommodations, without access to father's money, of course. How long do you think you'd last, Frances? A week? A month? Before you're taking in washing or worse?" The threat hung in the air between them. Frances knew it wasn't empty. The store and their parents' savings were in Walter's name. She had nothing of her own, except a small inheritance that would only come to her upon marriage or her 30th birthday, whichever came first. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "Try me," Walter replied, his voice hard. "I'm responsible for upholding this family's reputation. I won't have you throwing yourself at an unsuitable man again." Frances left the dishes and fled upstairs, tears burning in her eyes. As she sat on the edge of her bed, she realized with startling clarity that she was afraid of her brother, not just of his temper, but of what he might become. The controlling behavior, the threats, the occasional violence. It was escalating. The thought of Noah returned to her. "If your brother raises his hand to you again, you find me," he had said. But what could he really do? Walter held all the power in this situation, and they both knew it. Still, as she prepared for bed, Frances found herself drawn to the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could see the sheriff's office down the street, a single lamp still burning inside. Was Noah there, she wondered, or back at his boarding house room with his new supplies? The rain continued through the night and into the next day, turning Willow Creek's dirt streets into rivers of mud. Business was slow, giving Frances too much time to think about her predicament. By mid-afternoon, with Walter at a meeting of the town council, she had made a decision. She would talk to Noah not to ask for help, necessarily, but to understand her options. He had worked in enough frontier towns to know what possibilities might exist for a woman with limited means and no family support. At the very least, he might know of reputable boarding houses in nearby towns where she could stay while figuring out her next steps. Hanging the "back soon" sign on the door, Frances donned her rain cloak and headed for the sheriff's office. The streets were nearly deserted, with most townsfolk sensibly staying indoors. When she pushed open the door to the jailhouse, she found Noah alone at the desk, cleaning a revolver with methodical care. He looked up, surprise crossing his features before he quickly set the gun aside and stood. "Frances, is everything all right?" "Yes," she said, then reconsidered. "No, I don't know." She removed her wet cloak, hanging it on a peg near the door. "I need to talk to someone, and I trust you." Noah gestured to a chair across from the desk. "Sheriff's at the council meeting." "We've got privacy if you need it." Frances sat, suddenly uncertain how to begin. Noah waited patiently, his gray eyes attentive but not pressuring. "My brother threatened to throw me out," she finally said, "if I don't agree to his matchmaking efforts with James Simmons." Noah's expression remained neutral, though his jaw tightened slightly. "I see." "I don't think you do," Frances continued, the words coming faster now. "Everything is in Walter's name, the store, our parents' savings. I have nothing except a small inheritance that I can't access until I'm 30 or married. If he puts me out, I have nowhere to go and no means to support myself." "What about family? Friends?" Noah asked. Frances shook her head. "Our closest relatives are in St. Louis. I have friends here, but none who would risk Walter's anger by taking me in." Noah leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. "And this James Simmons, you're certain you couldn't?" "No," Frances said firmly. "Even if he weren't dreadfully dull, I won't be forced into marriage to solve my brother's financial arrangements." A slight smile touched Noah's lips. "Fair enough." He was quiet for a moment, thinking. "There are options, Frances. Not easy ones, perhaps, but they exist." "Such as?" "The school teacher in Clearwater is looking for an assistant. It's a small town about 2 days' ride from here. Or there's Mrs. Donovan's boarding house in Junction City. She often takes on women to help with cooking and cleaning in exchange for room and board." Frances nodded slowly. "Those sound possible, but not ideal," Noah finished for her. "No," she admitted. "I don't want to leave Willow Creek. Despite everything, it's my home. The store was my father's life's work, and—" She hesitated. "And," Noah prompted gently. "And there are reasons I might want to stay," she said, meeting his eyes briefly before looking away. The silence that followed was charged with unspoken understanding. When Noah spoke again, his voice had softened. "Frances, I need to ask you something. Has Walter ever done more than raise his hand to you?" "The day I arrived, was that the first time?" She nodded. "The first time he struck me, yes, but he's been controlling in other ways, especially since our parents died." Noah's expression darkened. "That kind of control often escalates." "I know," she whispered, he seemed to come to a decision. "I won't let him hurt you again." The simple declaration, spoken with such quiet certainty, brought unexpected tears to Francis's eyes. "You can't always be there." "No," Noah agreed. "But I can help you find a way out of this situation that doesn't involve leaving everything you care about." A loud bang made them both jump as the door flew open, revealing Walter, his face contorted with fury. "I might have known," he snarled, advancing into the room. "Council meeting ends early, and where do I find my sister?" "Alone with you." Noah stood slowly, his posture relaxed but alert. "Mr. Lawson, your sister came to report concerns about possible save your lies." Walter cut him off. "I saw the sign on the store door." "I know she came running to you." He turned to Francis. "Get your things. We're leaving." Francis remained seated. "No, Walter, we need to talk about this reasonably." "Reasonably?" Walter's laugh was ugly. "There's nothing reasonable about your behavior. First Patrick Thompson, now this drifter with a badge. What would Father say if he could see you now?" "Father would be ashamed of how you've been treating me," Francis replied, finding courage in Noah's steady presence. Walter's face flushed dark red. "You ungrateful!" He started toward her, hand raised. Noah moved with surprising speed, placing himself between them. "That's enough, Lawson." "Get out of my way," Walter growled. "She's my sister, my responsibility." "She's a grown woman," Noah countered, his voice level but firm. "And you're in the sheriff's office threatening violence. Think carefully about your next move." Walter's eyes darted between them, calculation replacing some of the rage. "Fine. Frances can find her own way home, but don't bother coming back to the store or our house. You've made your choice." "Walter, please." Francis stood, alarm replacing defiance. "You can't mean that." "I warned you what would happen," Walter said coldly. "You chose this. This man over your family. Now you can live with the consequences." As Walter stormed out, slamming the door behind him, Frances sank back into the chair, her legs suddenly weak. "He actually did it. He threw me out." Noah knelt beside her chair. "Frances, look at me." When she met his eyes, he continued, "This isn't your fault. Your brother is trying to control you through fear and isolation. It's wrong." "But where will I go?" she whispered. "What will I do?" "First things first," Noah said practically. "We need to get your belongings from the house before he can prevent it." He stood, retrieving his hat and gun belt from the desk. "I'll escort you there now." Frances shook her head. "No, that will only make things worse. Let me try to talk to him first once he's had time to calm down." "Frances," Noah said gently, "men like your brother don't calm down. They stew until their anger finds a new target. Right now, that target is you. At least let me walk you somewhere safe for tonight." "Mrs. Wilson might take me in," Frances said, thinking of her friend who ran the millinery shop. "She's never approved of Walter's behavior since our parents died." "Good," Noah nodded. "I'll take you there, then help you retrieve your things tomorrow if Walter hasn't come to his senses." As they stepped out into the rain, Frances felt simultaneously terrified and liberated. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in 2 years, she was making her own choices. Mary Wilson proved to be more than willing to offer Frances temporary shelter, clucking sympathetically over the situation while shooting admiring glances at Noah. "Of course you'll stay with me, dear," she assured Frances. "That brother of yours needs a good talking to. Always thought he was too big for his britches, even when your father was alive." Noah left them at Mary's door with a promise to check on Frances the following morning. As he turned to go, his hand briefly touched hers, a small gesture of reassurance that nonetheless sent warmth spreading through her fingers. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded once. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be soon enough to figure out the next steps." That night, As Frances lay in Mary's spare bedroom listening to the rain against the windows, she felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. She had no money, no job, and had been cast out by her only family, yet somehow she felt more in control of her life than she had in years. Noah's face appeared in her mind's eye, not just his handsome features, but the steadiness in his gaze, the quiet confidence in his movements. There was something about him that made her feel safe, despite having known him only a few days. It was dangerous to put such trust in a relative stranger, she knew. Yet she couldn't help feeling that Noah Yates was exactly who he appeared to be, a good man trying to do right in a complicated world. Morning brought clearing skies and a visit from Sheriff Miller himself, his weathered face creased with concern as he spoke to Frances in Mary's parlor. "Deputy Yates filled me in on the situation," he said, twisting his hat in his hands. "I've known your family for many years, Frances. Your father was a good man. I'm sorry to see things come to this with Walter." "Thank you, Sheriff," Frances replied. "I'm hoping once Walter calms down we can discuss matters reasonably." Miller's expression suggested he shared Noah's doubts about that possibility. "Well, in the meantime, I've spoken to Judge Parker. The law's clear on this. Walter can't keep you from retrieving your personal possessions. The judge says I'm to accompany you to collect your things." "Is that really necessary?" Frances asked, dismayed at the thought of such a public display. "Better safe than sorry," Miller said firmly. "Deputy Yates wanted to come along, but I thought that might inflame the situation, given Walter's feelings about him." Frances felt a pang of disappointment mixed with relief. Noah's presence would be comforting, but the sheriff was right, it would only antagonize Walter further. "When should we go?" she asked. "No time like the present," Miller replied, standing. "Better to get it done before store hours, minimize the gossip." The walk to Lawson's general store felt interminable. Frances was acutely aware of curtains twitching as they passed, neighbors watching this latest drama unfold. By nightfall, everyone in Willow Creek would know that Frances Lawson had been thrown out by her brother. Walter was behind the counter when they entered, his face expressionless as he looked up from his ledger. "Sheriff," he acknowledged coldly, ignoring Frances entirely. "Walter," Miller nodded. "Frances has come to collect her personal belongings. Judge Parker asked me to accompany her, make sure everything goes smoothly." Walter's jaw tightened, but he gestured toward the stairs. "Take what's yours and go." Frances moved past him, feeling his eyes on her back as she climbed the stairs to their living quarters. In her bedroom, she worked quickly, packing clothes, books, and the few keepsakes she had inherited from their mother into a carpet bag and a small trunk. It wasn't much to show for 22 years of life. As she was folding her last dress, she heard footsteps in the doorway. Walter stood watching her, his expression unreadable. "You've made your choice then," he said flatly. Frances straightened. "You gave me no choice, Walter. You tried to control my life, threaten me into a marriage I don't want." "I was looking out for your future," he insisted. "What kind of future do you think you'll have with him? He's a gunslinger, Frances. Men like that don't settle down." "This isn't about Deputy Yates," Frances said, though her cheeks warmed. Walter's laugh was bitter. "Isn't it? I've seen how you look at him, how he looks at you. It's been less than a week, and you're throwing away your family for a man you barely know." "I'm not throwing away family," Frances countered. "You did that when you struck me in the street, when you threatened to put me out if I didn't bend to your will." She closed the carpet bag with finality. "Our parents raised us better than this, Walter. What happened to you?" For a moment, something like regret flickered across Walter's features. Then his expression hardened again. "Take your things and get out. You're no longer welcome in this house." Sheriff Miller appeared in the doorway behind Walter. "Everything all right up here?" "Fine," Frances said, lifting her chin. "I'm ready to go." The sheriff took her trunk while she carried the carpet bag. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, the bell above the store door jingled. Noah stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the morning light. "Thought you might need help carrying things," he said to the sheriff, though his eyes went to Frances. Walter made a disgusted sound. "Of course. The White Knight arrives right on cue." Noah ignored him, moving to take the trunk from Sheriff Miller. "Where to, Miss Lawson?" "Mary Wilson's for now," Frances replied, aware of Walter's glare burning into her back as they left the store. Outside, Miller excused himself to return to his duties, leaving Frances alone with Noah as they walked toward Mary's shop. "I thought the sheriff advised you not to come," Frances said quietly. "He did," Noah admitted, "but I was worried about you." The simple statement warmed something inside her. "Thank you for everything." Noah glanced down at her, his expression softening. "You've shown remarkable courage, Frances. Most people would find it harder to stand up to family, especially when the consequences are so steep." "I'm not sure courage is the right word," she replied. "Desperation, perhaps?" "Sometimes they're the same thing," Noah said, doing what's necessary despite the fear. They walked in companionable silence for a moment before Frances asked, "What happens now?" Noah considered this. "That depends on what you want. There are still those options we discussed, Clearwater or Junction City." Frances slowed her steps. "And if I want to stay in Willow Creek?" "Then we find a way to make that possible," Noah replied. "Mary can't keep you indefinitely, but there might be other arrangements. Mrs. Jenkins at the boarding house might have a room available, or perhaps—" "Perhaps," Frances prompted when he trailed off. Noah seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "Frances, I don't want to presume anything. We've known each other only a few days, but I think there might be something between us worth exploring if you felt the same way." Frances's heart quickened. "I do," she admitted softly, "though as Walter pointed out, it seems rather sudden." "Some things don't need time," Noah said. "Just clarity." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "I've moved around most of my life, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. But when I rode into Willow Creek and saw you standing up to your brother despite everything, something changed for me." Frances felt her cheeks grow warm under his steady gaze. "Noah, you don't need to say anything now," he interrupted gently. "You have enough to deal with. Just know that whatever you decide about your future, I'd like to be part of it, if you'll have me." Before Frances could respond, Mary Wilson came hurrying toward them from her shop, her expression troubled. "Frances, dear, I was just coming to find you. There's been a development." "What is it?" Frances asked, alarm rising in her throat. Mary glanced uncertainly at Noah before continuing. "James Simmons came by the store this morning after you left," Walter told him. "Well, he told him you'd run off with the new deputy. James was quite upset. He's gone to speak with his uncle." Frances closed her eyes briefly. "Of course he has. Walter couldn't simply let me go. He had to ensure my reputation was ruined as well." Noah's expression had darkened. "Mrs. Wilson, would you take Frances's things back to your place? I need to have a word with Lawson." "Noah, don't," Frances said quickly, laying a hand on his arm. "It will only make things worse." "He's deliberately spreading lies about you," Noah replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. "About both of us. And confronting him will only convince people the lies are true," Frances pointed out. "Let's be smarter than Walter. We'll speak to Reverend Simmons directly, explain the situation." Noah studied her face for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "You're right, but this can't go unanswered, Frances." "It won't," she assured him, "but we need to be careful about how we respond." They continued to Mary's shop. where Frances spent the rest of the morning helping with inventory to distract herself from her troubles. Noah returned to his duties at the sheriff's office, promising to call on her that evening to discuss their next steps. As Frances worked, she found her thoughts continually returning to Noah's words. Some things don't need time, just clarity. Was it possible to know so quickly that someone was important to you, that they might become essential? She thought of Patrick Thompson, whom she had known her entire life. Their courtship had been comfortable, expected two young people who had grown up together naturally gravitating toward one another. What she felt for Noah was entirely different, a connection that had sparked instantly and grown with each interaction, despite the brevity of their acquaintance. By the time evening came, Frances had made a decision. When Noah arrived at Mary's shop after closing, she was waiting for him, her resolve firm despite her nerves. "Let's walk," she suggested, pulling on her shawl against the cooling evening air. Noah offered his arm, which she took after only a slight hesitation. They strolled toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open prairie stretching toward distant hills. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," Frances began, gathering her courage. "About there being something between us worth exploring." Noah glanced down at her, his expression carefully neutral. And I think you're right," she said softly. "I've never felt this way about anyone before, this certainty, this recognition. As if I've been waiting to meet you without knowing it." The corners of Noah's mouth lifted in a small, tender smile. "I feel the same way. But," Frances continued, "my situation complicates things. I have no home, no means of support. Won't be dependent on you or anyone else." Noah nodded slowly. "I understand that. Independence matters to you." "It does," she agreed. "After these years with Walter, I need to know I can stand on my own." They had reached the edge of town, where a small creek gurgled alongside the path. Noah guided her to a fallen log that served as a natural bench, and they sat side by side, watching the water flow past in the fading light. "What if," Noah said carefully, "we found a way for you to be independent while still exploring what's between us? Such as..." Sheriff Miller mentioned that Mrs. Holbrook is looking to sell the dress shop since her husband's death. She wants to move east to live with her daughter. Frances turned to him in surprise. "The dress shop? But I couldn't possibly afford your inheritance," Noah reminded her. "You said you can access it upon marriage." The implication hung in the air between them. Frances's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "Noah," she said carefully, "are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "I'm suggesting that there are practical solutions to practical problems. And I'm suggesting that sometimes life presents opportunities we'd be fools to ignore." "We barely know each other," Frances whispered, though her heart wasn't in the objection. "We know what matters," Noah replied. "I know you're brave and kind and determined. You know I'll never raise a hand to you in anger, that I respect your independence, that I..." He paused, then continued more softly, "that I'm falling in love with you, Frances Lawson." The words sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening chill. "This is madness," she said, but she was smiling now. "The best kind," Noah agreed, his gray eyes warm with affection. "I'm not proposing marriage this minute, Frances. But I am proposing a future where it's a possibility. Where we face your brother and this town together, where you have the independence you need, and where we see if this feeling between us is as real and lasting as I believe it to be." Frances looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, honest, steady, kind. "Yes," she said simply. Noah's smile transformed his face, erasing the weathered lines and revealing a younger, more carefree man beneath. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning at first, then deepening as Frances responded. When they finally parted, she felt dizzy with emotion and possibility. "Well," Noah said, his voice slightly rough. "That settles it." Frances laughed, the sound carrying across the open prairie. "Settles what exactly?" "That this is worth fighting for," he replied. "No matter what your brother or this town throws at us." As they walked back toward Mary's shop, arm in arm in the gathering darkness, Frances felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since before her parents' death. There were still challenges ahead: Walter's anger, the town's gossip, establishing her independence, but for the first time, she didn't face them alone. The next morning brought unexpected news. Reverend Simmons arrived at Mary's shop shortly after opening, his expression grave as he asked to speak with Frances privately. "I've heard troubling rumors," he began once they were seated in Mary's back room. "Your brother claims you've engaged in inappropriate behavior with Deputy Yates." Frances met his gaze steadily. "My brother is angry because I refused to court his chosen suitor, Reverend. He threw me out of our home when I stood up to his controlling behavior." The Reverend studied her face. "James was quite upset. He believed there was an understanding between you." "There was never any understanding," Frances replied firmly. "Walter arranged that dinner without consulting me. I made no promises to James Simmons." Reverend Simmons sighed heavily. "These situations are always complicated, my dear. Family disagreements can bring out the worst in good people." "With all due respect, Reverend, this is more than a disagreement. My brother struck me in public last week. Deputy Yates intervened. That's how this began." The minister's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Struck you, Walter? I find that difficult to believe." "Ask anyone who was on the street that day," Frances said. "It happened right outside the store." Reverend Simmons was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "And your relationship with Deputy Yates? Is there truth to Walter's accusations?" Frances felt her cheeks warm. "Noah, Deputy Yates has been kind and supportive during a difficult time. Any attachment between us has developed properly and respectfully." The Reverend nodded slowly. "I see." He stood, straightening his coat. "I believe I need to speak with Walter, and perhaps Sheriff Miller as well. It seems there's more to this situation than I was led to believe." After he left, Frances sat for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. Reverend Simmons was influential in Willow Creek. His opinion carried weight. If he came to believe Walter was in the wrong, it could significantly impact how the town viewed the situation. Mary poked her head into the room. "Everything all right, dear?" The Reverend looked quite serious when he left. "I think it might be," Frances replied, surprising herself with her optimism. "He's going to speak with Walter." "Well, that's good news," Mary said. "Oh, and Deputy Yates stopped by while you were talking. Asked me to tell you he'll come by at noon. Something about a property he wants you to see." Frances's heart quickened. The dress shop, she presumed. It was happening so quickly, her entire life changing course in less than a week. When Noah arrived at midday, his smile was infectious. "Got a few hours free," he said. "Thought I'd show you that opportunity we discussed." They walked arm in arm through town, ignoring the curious stares of townsfolk. Frances was acutely aware of the gossip their appearance together would generate, but found she cared less than expected. Let them talk. The truth would emerge eventually. Mrs. Holbrook's dress shop was a tidy establishment on a good corner of Main Street. The widow greeted them warmly, showing Frances around the space with obvious pride. "Built the business from nothing," she explained, running her hand lovingly over a bolt of fine blue cotton. "Started with just mending and alterations, gradually added fabrics and patterns, then ready-made items for those who don't sew." Frances examined the workroom, the the neat displays, the quality of the merchandise. It was a sound business, she could tell, small but profitable, with room to grow. "Why are you selling?" she asked. Mrs. Holbrook's smile turned wistful. "After Henry passed, the joy went out of it. My daughter has been begging me to come east, help with her children. I'm not getting any younger." As they toured the living quarters above the shop, two small but comfortable rooms with a kitchen area, Frances could easily envision herself there. Independent, self-supporting, building something of her own. "What do you think?" Noah asked quietly as Mrs. Holbrook stepped away to find some ledgers. "It's perfect," Frances admitted. "But there's still the matter of the money. Even if we were to take that step, my inheritance isn't enough to buy the business outright." Noah nodded. "I spoke with Mrs. Holbrook about that. She's willing to accept partial payment now, with the balance paid over 2 years. She says she'd rather sell to someone who will care for the business than get all her money at once." Frances looked at him in surprise. "You've thought of everything." "Not everything," he replied with a small smile, "but I'm trying." When Mrs. Holbrook returned with her records, the three of them sat down to discuss terms. By the time they left an hour later, Frances had a verbal agreement to purchase the dress shop, contingent on her accessing her inheritance. "I still can't quite believe this is happening," she said as they walked back toward Mary's shop. "A week ago, I was living under Walter's thumb with no way out. Now you're about to be a business owner," Noah finished for her. "Independent, respected." Frances glanced up at him. "There's still one significant detail we haven't discussed." Noah's eyes crinkled at the corners. "You mean the part where we'd need to be married for you to access your inheritance?" "That's the one," she agreed, feeling heat rise to her cheeks again. Noah stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Frances, I meant what I said last night. I'm falling in love with you. I believe what's between us is real and lasting, but I would never want you to marry me out of necessity rather than choice." "What if it's both?" she asked softly. "What if the necessity simply accelerated something that was already happening?" Noah's expression softened. "Then I'd say we're fortunate. Not everyone finds love and practical solutions in the same package." Frances laughed, the sound light and genuine. "When you put it that way, it does seem rather providential." They resumed walking, comfortable in their shared understanding. As they approached Mary's shop, however, Frances slowed her steps. "There's one more thing we need to discuss," she said, her voice turning serious. "Walter, he won't accept this easily." Noah's expression hardened slightly. "No, I don't expect he will. But he has no legal right to prevent you from accessing your inheritance or marrying whom you choose. You're of age." "It's not the legal aspects that concern me," Frances admitted. "It's what he might do in his anger. Walter has always been stubborn, but lately there's something darker in him." Noah nodded soberly. "I've seen his type before. Men who believe control is their right, who can't accept when it slips away from them." He squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We'll be careful, Frances, but we won't let fear of your brother dictate our choices." That evening, after closing the millinery shop, Mary Wilson hosted an impromptu dinner for Frances, Noah, Sheriff Miller, and Mrs. Holbrook. As they enjoyed Mary's excellent cooking, the conversation naturally turned to plans for the dress shop and the rapidly developing relationship between Frances and Noah. "Never seen two people fall in love so quickly," Mary observed, her romantic heart clearly delighted by the turn of events. "Though I must say, it suits you both." Sheriff Miller raised his glass in a toast to new beginnings and to finding the right person at the right time. As glasses clinked around the table, Frances felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years. These good people, some new in her life, some long-standing friends, had rallied around her when she needed support most. Whatever Walter might say or do, She wasn't alone anymore. After dinner, Noah walked Francis to the small garden behind Mary's shop, where they could speak privately under a sky brilliant with stars. "I spoke with Reverend Simmons this afternoon," Noah said, leaning against the garden fence. "He came to the office after speaking with Walter." Francis tensed slightly. "What did he say?" He wanted to hear my side of things. "Asked about that first day when I stopped Walter from hitting you. Asked about my intentions toward you." Noah's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "I think I passed inspection." "And Walter?" Noah's expression grew more serious. The Reverend wouldn't say much, but I gathered their conversation didn't go well. Walter apparently refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. Francis sighed. "That sounds like him. He's convinced he's acting in my best interest even when he's hurting me." "Reverend Simmons mentioned he's concerned about Walter's state of mind," Noah continued carefully. "Said there's been talk around town about his temper, his drinking. Apparently, your brother's behavior has been noticed by more people than just us." The news was both validating and deeply sad. Francis had watched Walter change over the past 2 years, becoming harder, more controlling, more prone to dark moods and angry outbursts. To hear that others had seen it too confirmed her fears about her brother's deterioration. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Noah took her hand, his touch warm and steadying. "Now we move forward. I'll speak with Judge Parker tomorrow about a marriage license. Mrs. Holbrook is willing to wait a week to finalize the sale of the shop, and Mary's happy to have you stay here until—" He paused, suddenly looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Until we're married," Francis finished for him, a smile playing at her lips despite the seriousness of their conversation. Noah's answering smile was warm. "Yes, until we're married. If that's still what you want, Francis." She stepped closer to him, resting her free hand against his chest. Through his shirt, she could feel the steady beating of his heart. "It is what I want, not just for the practical benefits, though those matter, but because in a few short days, you've shown me more respect and kindness than Walter has in years. Because when I'm with you, I feel safe, valued, seen." Noah raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss against her knuckles. "I'll spend my life trying to be worthy of that trust," he said softly. "I promise you that, Francis." As he drew her into his arms for a tender kiss, Francis let herself believe in the promise of their future together, a future built on mutual respect and genuine affection, where she could be both independent and cherished. The next morning, Francis awoke to raised voices from Mary's shop below. Dressing quickly, she hurried downstairs to find Walter confronting Mary, his face flushed with anger. "Where is she?" he demanded. "I know she's here." "Walter," Francis said firmly, stepping into the room, "that's enough. You're frightening Mary." Walter whirled to face her, his eyes bloodshot, his clothing disheveled. He had clearly been drinking despite the early hour. "There you are," he said, his voice thick. "Come to pack your things. You're coming home." Francis stayed where she was, keeping the counter between them. "No, Walter." "I'm not. Don't be ridiculous," he snapped. "This has gone on long enough. I'm willing to forget your indiscretion with the deputy. You can still make things right with James Simmons." "There was no indiscretion," Francis replied calmly, "and I have no interest in James Simmons." "I'm staying in Willow Creek, Walter, but not with you." Walter's expression darkened. "What are you talking about?" Francis took a deep breath. "I'm buying Mrs. Holbrook's dress shop. I'll be living above it, running the business myself." Walter laughed, the sound harsh and disbelieving. "With what money? You don't have a cent to your name." "I'm accessing my inheritance," Francis said, "the one mother and father left me." "You can't," Walter retorted. "Not until you're 30, or—" His expression changed as understanding dawned. "No, you wouldn't." "Deputy Yates and I are getting married," Frances confirmed, lifting her chin. Judge Parker is drawing up the license today. Walter's face contorted with rage. I won't allow it. He's using you, Frances, can't you see that? He wants your money, a respectable wife to improve his standing. Men like him don't settle down with one woman. They take what they want and move on. You don't know him, Frances said. And you don't know me anymore either. I'm not the docile sister you can control with threats and intimidation. Walter stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. You stupid, ungrateful. The shop door opened, bell jingling cheerfully in stark contrast to the tension in the room. Noah entered, immediately assessing the situation with a quick glance. Everything all right here, ladies? He asked mildly, though his posture was alert, ready for trouble. Get out, Walter snarled. This is family business. Noah moved to stand beside Frances. When it concerns my future wife, it's my business too. Walter's laugh was ugly. Future wife? You work fast, deputy, been in town, what, a week, and already secured yourself a wife with an inheritance. Walter, stop, Frances pleaded. This isn't helping anything. You're making a mistake, Frances, Walter said, ignoring her plea. He'll ruin you, take your money, probably get himself killed in some gunfight and leave you a widow. Is that what you want? What I want, Frances replied evenly, is to live my own life, make my own choices. Whether they're mistakes or not, they'll be mine. Walter stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. When he spoke again, his voice was low and dangerous. You'll regret this. Both of you. He turned and stalked out of the shop, slamming the door behind him so hard that the bell fell from its mount. Mary let out a shaky breath. My goodness, I've never seen Walter like that. Noah placed a gentle hand on Frances's shoulder. Are you all right? She nodded, though her heart was racing. Yes, but I'm worried about Walter. He's not thinking clearly. I'll have a word with Sheriff Miller, Noah said. We'll keep an eye on him. He hesitated, then added, maybe we should move up our plans, get married sooner rather than later. Frances considered this. How soon were you thinking? Tomorrow, Noah suggested. Judge Parker can perform the ceremony. Just a simple, legal wedding to protect your interests. Later, when things have settled, we can have a proper ceremony in the church if you want. The practicality of the suggestion appealed to Frances. A quiet legal ceremony would give her access to her inheritance and allow her to complete the purchase of the dress shop quickly. It would also provide her with the protection of Noah's name and position in town. Yes, she decided. Tomorrow. Mary clapped her hands together. A wedding. Oh, but you must have a proper dress, Frances, and flowers. I'll speak to Mrs. Baker about a cake. Frances smiled at her friend's enthusiasm. Mary, it's just going to be a simple legal ceremony. Nonsense, Mary insisted. Even a simple wedding should be special. Now, let me think about what we have in the shop that might work for a wedding dress. As Mary bustled off to examine her inventory, Noah drew Frances into a gentle embrace. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly. I don't want to rush you. Frances looked up into his concerned face. I'm sure about you, she said simply. The timing is unconventional, but it feels right. Noah's smile warmed his entire face. It does, doesn't it? Almost like it was meant to be. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Judge Parker agreed to perform the ceremony at noon the following day in his office. Mary and Mrs. Baker collaborated on a small reception to be held afterward at the boarding house. Sheriff Miller promised to keep an eye on Walter, though he reported that Lawson had locked himself in the rooms above the store and was refusing to see anyone. By evening, Frances had a simple but elegant cream-colored dress with lace trim to wear for the ceremony, altered quickly by Mary's skilled hands. Mrs. Holbrook had drawn up the sale papers for the dress shop, ready to be signed once Frances could access her inheritance. Everything was falling into place with surprising speed. As Noah walked Francis back to Mary's house after a quiet dinner at the hotel restaurant, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Nervous?" Noah asked, noting her thoughtful expression. "A little," Francis admitted. "Not about marrying you," she added quickly. "Just about how fast everything is happening. A week ago my life was so different." Noah nodded understandingly. "Mine too. I came to Willow Creek looking for a quiet place to start over. Didn't expect to find a wife and a whole new life within days." "Do you have regrets?" Francis asked, suddenly anxious. "About how quickly we're doing this?" Noah stopped walking, turning to face her fully. In the fading light, his gray eyes were dark and serious. "Francis, I've spent my adult life moving from place to place, never putting down roots. I've seen a lot of things, good and bad, met a lot of people, never once felt about anyone the way I feel about you." "And how is that?" she asked softly. Noah's smile was tender. "Like I've been wandering all my life and suddenly found where I'm supposed to be." The simple sincerity of his words brought tears to Francis's eyes. "I feel the same way," she whispered. He kissed her then, a gentle, reverent kiss that promised a lifetime of such moments to come. When they parted, Francis felt a certainty settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and mild, a perfect late spring day. Francis woke early, too excited and nervous to sleep. Mary helped her dress and arrange her hair, chattering happily about the small reception to follow the ceremony. "Mrs. Baker's outdone herself with the cake," Mary reported. "And Mrs. Jenkins has decorated the boarding house parlor beautifully. Oh, and Sheriff Miller will give you away since—" "Well, since Walter isn't likely to perform that duty." Francis nodded, a pang of sadness cutting through her happiness. Despite everything, Walter was her only family. His absence from her wedding, while expected, was a painful reminder of how broken their relationship had become. "Has anyone seen him today?" she asked. Mary's expression grew concerned. "Not that I've heard. Sheriff Miller checked on him last night, said he was drinking heavily but not causing trouble." Francis sighed. "I wish things could be different between us." "Perhaps they will be in time," Mary said kindly. "Once Walter sees how happy you are, how well you're doing with the dress shop." Francis wished she could share her friend's optimism, but Walter's parting words yesterday had been deeply troubling. There had been something in his eyes, a darkness beyond mere anger that had frightened her. At 11:30, Sheriff Miller arrived to escort Francis to the judge's office. The older man looked uncomfortable in his best suit, but his smile was genuine as he offered her his arm. "You look beautiful, Francis," he said gruffly. "Your parents would be proud of the woman you've become." The simple words brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you, Sheriff. That means a great deal to me." As they walked through town, Francis was touched by the number of people who came out of shops and houses to wish her well. It seemed the town had largely taken her side in the conflict with Walter, perhaps because of the Reverend's influence, or simply because they had witnessed her brother's deteriorating behavior over the past 2 years. Noah was waiting outside the judge's office, looking handsome and slightly nervous in a new shirt and his best vest. When he saw Francis approaching, his face lit up with such obvious love and admiration that she felt her heart swell. "You're a vision," he said softly as she reached him. Judge Parker's office was small but dignified, with law books lining the walls and a large oak desk dominating the space. The judge himself, a tall, thin man with spectacles and a serious demeanor, stood ready to perform the ceremony. Reverend Simmons was present as a witness, along with Sheriff Miller and Mary Wilson. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Francis and Noah exchanged simple vows, promising to love, honor, and respect one another for as long as they both lived. When Noah slipped a plain gold band onto her finger, a ring he had purchased from the jeweler just that morning, Francis felt a sense of rightness and belonging wash over her. By the authority vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife, Judge Parker declared. You may kiss your bride, Deputy Yates. Noah's kiss was gentle and reverent, a promise sealed before witnesses. When they turned to face their small audience, Francis was surprised to see tears in Mary's eyes and even the sheriff looking suspiciously misty. "Congratulations, Mrs. Yates," Reverend Simmons said, stepping forward to shake Noah's hand and kiss Francis's cheek. "May God bless your union with joy and prosperity." The small reception at the boarding house was a cheerful affair. It seemed half the town dropped by to congratulate the newlyweds and sample Mrs. Baker's excellent cake. Francis was touched by the community's support, though she couldn't help glancing occasionally at the door, half hoping Walter might appear to make peace. He never did. As the afternoon wore on, Noah noticed her preoccupation. "He'll come around eventually," he said quietly, taking her hand in his. "Once he sees this isn't some rash decision that will end badly." Francis squeezed his hand gratefully. "I hope you're right. Despite everything, he's still my brother." By early evening, the reception was winding down. Francis and Noah had decided to spend their wedding night at the hotel, a small extravagance, before moving into the rooms above the dress shop the following day. As they prepared to leave the boarding house, Sheriff Miller approached them, his expression troubled. "Hate to bring this up today of all days," he said apologetically, "but there's been a development with Walter. He's clearing out the store, selling everything at half price, telling folks he's leaving town." Francis stared at the sheriff in shock. "Leaving? But the store has been in our family for 2 generations. Father built it from nothing." Miller nodded grimly. "I know. Thought you should hear it from me rather than town gossip. He's been drinking all day, getting more belligerent as the hours pass. Might be best if you both steer clear until he sobers up." Noah thanked the sheriff for the warning, his arm protective around Francis's waist as they walked to the hotel. "Are you all right?" he asked once they were alone in their room. Francis sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process this latest development. "I never thought he'd leave," she said quietly. "The store meant everything to our father. To think Walter would just abandon it." Noah sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "People do strange things when they're hurting, Francis. Walter's pride has been wounded. He feels he's lost control, lost face in the town. Some men can't handle that." "Should I try to talk to him?" Francis wondered. "Try to make him see reason." Noah's expression grew concerned. "Not alone and not while he's drinking. Let's give him a few days to calm down. Then we can approach him together." Francis nodded reluctantly. Noah was right. Confronting Walter in his current state would likely do more harm than good. Still, the thought of her brother abandoning their family legacy out of spite troubled her deeply. "This should be a happy day," she said, attempting to smile. "Our wedding day." Noah's expression softened. He reached up to touch her cheek gently. "It still can be, Francis. We can't control Walter's choices, only our own. And I, for one, am choosing to focus on the fact that I just married the most remarkable woman I've ever met." His words warmed her heart, easing some of the worry. "How do you always know exactly what to say?" Noah's smile was tender. "Because I know you. Even in this short time, I feel like I've known you forever." He kissed her then, a deeper, more passionate kiss than the one they had shared at the ceremony. Francis responded eagerly, allowing the concerns about Walter to fade as she focused on the man who was now her husband. Their wedding night was everything Frances could have hoped for: tender, passionate, a beautiful beginning to their life together. Noah's gentleness and care confirmed what she already knew, that she had found a partner who would always treat her with respect and love. The next morning, they signed the final papers for the dress shop. With access to her inheritance, Frances was able to pay Mrs. Holbrook the agreed-upon down payment, with the remainder to be paid over the next 2 years. By noon, she was officially the proprietor of Willow Creek Dress Shop, with plans to expand the inventory and services offered. "Mrs. Frances Yates, businesswoman," Noah said proudly as they placed her new sign in the window. "Has a nice ring to it." Frances smiled up at him, happiness momentarily eclipsing her concerns about Walter. "It does, doesn't it? Though I admit I'm still getting used to the Mrs. Yates part." "You have time," Noah assured her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "A lifetime, in fact." They spent the afternoon moving Frances's belongings from Mary's house to their new home above the shop. It wasn't large, just a bedroom, small sitting area, and kitchen, but it was theirs, a place to build their life together. As evening approached, Noah reluctantly prepared to leave for his night shift at the sheriff's office. "I wish I could stay," he said, holding Frances close. "Especially our first night in our new home." "You have responsibilities," Frances replied, understanding though disappointed. "I'll be here when you finish your shift." Noah kissed her goodbye, promising to return as soon as his duties allowed. Frances watched him go from the shop doorway, still marveling at how quickly her life had changed. A week ago, she had been living under Walter's thumb, with no hope of escape. Now she was married to a good man, owned her own business, and had the independence she had long craved. The only shadow on her happiness was Walter. Despite his behavior, he was still her brother, her only blood relative. The thought of him leaving town, abandoning their family store out of spite and wounded pride, saddened her deeply. Making a sudden decision, Frances locked the shop and headed toward Lawson's general store. Perhaps if she spoke to Walter alone, reasoned with him, she could make him understand that there was no need for such drastic measures. They could still be family, even if they disagreed about her choices. The store was dark when she arrived, the closed sign hanging crookedly in the window. Frances hesitated, then tried the door. To her surprise, it was unlocked. She stepped inside, the familiar smell of leather, tobacco, and coffee bringing a rush of memories. "Walter," she called softly, "are you here?" The store was in disarray. Shelves half empty, goods piled haphazardly on the counter. It looked as if Walter had indeed been selling off inventory without care for organization or proper business practices. A noise from the back room drew her attention. Frances moved cautiously through the store, calling her brother's name again. When she pushed open the door to the storeroom, she found Walter sitting on a crate, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in his hand. "Come to gloat?" he asked, his words slurring slightly. Frances shook her head, staying in the doorway. "No, Walter, I came because I heard you were selling everything, leaving town. I wanted to talk to you." Walter's laugh was bitter. "Now you want to talk, after you've married that drifter, after you've humiliated me in front of the whole town." "I never meant to humiliate you," Frances said quietly. "I just needed to live my own life, make my own choices." Walter took another swig from the bottle. "Father would be ashamed of you, running off with the first man who showed you attention." "That's not fair," Frances protested. "Noah is a good man, and Father would have wanted me to be happy." "Happy," Walter repeated mockingly. "You think you'll be happy with him? When he leaves you behind for the next town, the next gunfight, men like him don't change, Frances." "You don't know him," Frances said, her patience wearing thin. "And this isn't about Noah, it's about us, about our family. This store has been in our family for 2 generations. How can you just abandon it?" Walter's expression darkened. "What's left for me here? My sister has betrayed me. The town has turned against me. Even the Reverend thinks I'm in the wrong." "It doesn't have to be this way," Francis pleaded. "We can still be family, Walter. You're my brother. I don't want to lose you." For a moment, something like vulnerability flickered across Walter's face. Then his expression hardened again. "You should have thought of that before you chose him over your own blood." Francis took a step forward, frustration overriding caution. "I didn't choose anyone over you, Walter. You forced me to choose when you tried to control every aspect of my life, when you struck me in the street, when you threatened to throw me out if I didn't marry a man of your choosing." Walter stood suddenly, swaying slightly from the whiskey. "Get out," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Get out of my store. Walter, please, get out," he roared, hurling the whiskey bottle against the wall where it shattered, sending glass and liquor spraying across the storeroom. Frances backed away, her heart pounding. This wasn't the brother she had grown up with, the one who had taught her to ride a horse and helped her with arithmetic. This was a stranger, twisted by anger and alcohol. "I'm sorry it's come to this," she said softly. "When you're ready to talk, really talk, you know where to find me." She turned and hurried through the store, fighting back tears. As she reached the front door, Walter's voice called after her. "This isn't over, Frances. You and that deputy. You'll regret what you've done." The threat followed her into the street, sending a chill down her spine despite the warm evening air. When Noah returned from his shift just after midnight, Frances was waiting up, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. One look at her face told him something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, immediately crossing to her side. Frances told him about her visit to Walter, his drunken state, and his parting threat. Noah listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "You shouldn't have gone alone," he said when she finished. "Walter's unstable right now, unpredictable." "He's my brother," Frances said. "I didn't think he would. I never imagined he could become like this." Noah sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "Grief affects people differently. Some turn it inward, some outward. Walter lost his parents, and now he feels he's lost you too. Add alcohol to that mix." "Do you think he meant it, about us regretting things?" Frances asked quietly. Noah hesitated, clearly weighing his words. "I think Walter is hurting and lashing out, whether he intends to act on his threats." "That's harder to say. But we'll be careful, keep an eye on him. I'll speak with Sheriff Miller in the morning." Frances nodded, leaning into her husband's solid strength. "I just wish things could be different, that Walter could be happy for us, or at least accept our marriage." "Give him time," Noah suggested, though his tone suggested he wasn't optimistic. "Sometimes people can surprise you." The next few days passed in a blur of activity as Frances prepared to open the dress shop under her management. She ordered new inventory, rearranged displays, and let the women of Willow Creek know that she would be offering expanded services, including custom dressmaking and alterations. Noah divided his time between his duties as deputy and helping Frances with the heavier work around the shop. They fell into an easy rhythm together, as if they had been partners for years rather than days. In the evenings, they would cook simple meals in their small kitchen, discussing the day's events and their plans for the future. Walter remained a shadow over their happiness. Though he hadn't approached them directly, reports from around town indicated he was still drinking heavily and making occasional vague threats. Sheriff Miller had spoken to him, warning him to keep the peace, but Walter had simply laughed and said he would be leaving town soon anyway. "He's sold most of the store's inventory," Miller reported to Noah and Frances. "Been drinking away the proceeds at the saloon. I'm keeping an eye on him, but there's not much else I can do unless he actually breaks the law." The day before the dress shop's grand reopening, Francis was working late, making final preparations for the morning. Noah had been called away to help the sheriff with a disturbance at the saloon, leaving Francis alone in the shop. She was arranging a display of ribbons when a noise from the back door startled her. It was past 9 o'clock, well after closing time for most businesses in town. "Hello," she called, moving cautiously toward the back room. "Is someone there?" The door connecting the shop to the storeroom burst open, revealing Walter. His clothes were disheveled, his eyes wild, and the smell of whiskey emanated from him in waves. "Walter," Francis gasped, backing away. "What are you doing here?" "Came to see my sister's new shop," he slurred, following her into the main room. "Very nice. Very respectable." Francis glanced toward the front door, calculating whether she could reach it before Walter blocked her path. "It's late, Walter. I was just closing up." "Why don't you come back tomorrow for the opening?" Walter laughed, the sound harsh and unnatural. "Oh, I don't think there's going to be an opening tomorrow, Francis." Francis felt a chill run down her spine at his words. "What do you mean?" Walter moved closer, swaying slightly. "You took everything from me, my sister, my reputation, this town's respect." His face twisted in a grotesque parody of a smile. "Seems only fair I take something from you in return." Francis's heart pounded as she realized what he meant. "Walter, no, this is madness. You're drunk and not thinking clearly." "Never been clearer," Walter countered, pulling something from his pocket. The flame of a match flared in the dim shop, illuminating his face with eerie light. "A little fire. That's all it takes. This place will burn like tinder." Francis lunged forward, trying to knock the match from his hand, but Walter shoved her back roughly. She stumbled against a display table, sending spools of ribbon cascading to the floor. "Walter, please," she begged. "This won't solve anything. It will only make things worse." "Worse?" Walter echoed, his expression darkening. "How could things possibly be worse? I've lost everything that mattered." "You haven't lost me," Francis said desperately. "You're my brother, Walter. Despite everything, I still care about you." Something flickered in Walter's eyes, a moment of clarity, perhaps, or a glimmer of the brother she had once known. The match burned down, singeing his fingers. He cursed, dropping it to the floor where Francis quickly stamped it out. For a moment, she thought she had reached him. Then Walter's face hardened again. "Liar," he hissed. "You chose him, that drifter, that killer." "Noah isn't a killer," Francis protested. "And I didn't choose him over you. You forced me to choose when you tried to control my life." Walter wasn't listening. He pulled more matches from his pocket, striking another. "If I can't have the respect of this town, if I can't have my sister's loyalty, then I'll make sure you remember me. Every time you look at the ashes of your precious shop, you'll remember what you did." The match flared, and Walter moved toward a rack of dresses, the flame hovering dangerously close to the delicate fabrics. Francis looked frantically around for something to stop him, spotting a pitcher of water on the counter that she had been using to refresh herself during the long day of preparations. She lunged for it, grabbing the pitcher and flinging the contents at Walter, just as he touched the match to a dress. The water doused both Walter and the small flame that had begun to catch on the fabric. Walter roared with rage, charging toward Francis with his hands outstretched. She ducked away, but not fast enough. His fingers caught in her hair, yanking her backward with painful force. "You little fool," he snarled, his face inches from hers. "Always defying me, always thinking you know better." Francis struggled against his grip, fear and anger giving her strength. "Let me go, Walter. This isn't you, this isn't the brother I grew up with. That brother is gone," Walter growled. "Died with our parents." His hands moved to her throat, thumbs pressing against her windpipe. Francis clawed at his wrists, gasping for air as black spots began to dance at the edges of her vision. Suddenly, the front door burst open. Noah stood there, his expression transforming from concern to cold fury as he took in the scene before him. "Let her go, Lawson," he commanded, his voice deadly quiet. "Now." Walter's grip tightened for a moment, then released as he turned to face Noah. "Come to save your wife, deputy." "Your precious Francis," he laughed bitterly. "Always the hero." Noah moved forward cautiously, positioning himself between Francis and her brother. "This ends now, Walter. You're drunk and not thinking straight. Let me take you to the jail to sleep it off. In the morning, we can talk about this reasonably." Walter's hand moved to his belt, drawing a small revolver that Francis hadn't noticed before. "No more talking," he said, leveling the gun at Noah. "You took everything from me, turned my own sister against me, made me a laughingstock in this town." "Walter, no," Francis cried, her voice hoarse from his assault on her throat. "Put the gun down, please." Noah held his hands out to his sides, making no move toward his own weapon. "Think about what you're doing, Walter. This isn't the way to solve anything, isn't it?" Walter's hand shook slightly, but the gun remained pointed at Noah's chest. "One bullet. That's all it would take. Then Francis would come home where she belongs." "I would never forgive you," Francis said, desperation making her voice crack. "If you hurt Noah, I would hate you forever, Walter." "Is that what you want?" Indecision flickered across Walter's face. His hand wavered, the gun barrel dipping slightly. For a moment, Francis thought he might relent. Then Walter's expression hardened once more. "You already hate me," he said flatly. "Nothing left to lose." He steadied the gun, his finger tightening on the trigger. Noah tensed, preparing to move, though Francis could see he had little chance of avoiding the shot at such close range. "No more," came a deep voice from the doorway. Sheriff Miller stood there, his own revolver drawn and aimed squarely at Walter. "Drop the gun, son. It's over." Walter froze, his gaze darting between Noah, Francis, and the sheriff. For a terrible moment, Francis thought he might turn the gun on himself or worse, try to shoot one of them anyway, knowing it would be the last thing he ever did. Then, like a puppet whose strings had been cut, Walter seemed to collapse inward. The gun clattered to the floor as he sank to his knees, his face crumpling. "What have I become?" he whispered, looking at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. "What would Father say if he could see me now?" Sheriff Miller moved forward cautiously, kicking the revolver away before placing a firm hand on Walter's shoulder. "Come on, son. Let's get you to the jail. You need to sleep this off." As the sheriff led Walter away, Noah turned to Francis, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you hurt?" Francis shook her head, though her throat ached from Walter's grip. "No, just shaken." Noah pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if to reassure himself that she was truly safe. "When I heard the commotion from the street, when I saw his hands on you." "You came in time," Francis whispered against his chest. "You always seem to be there when I need you most." Noah kissed the top of her head, his arms still wrapped protectively around her. "Always will be, Francis, that's a promise." Later that night, as they sat in their small living quarters above the shop, Noah gently applied a soothing salve to the bruises forming on Francis's neck. His touch was tender, his expression troubled. "What will happen to Walter?" Francis asked quietly. Noah sighed. "That's up to Judge Parker." "Attempted arson, assault. These are serious charges, Francis. He could face significant time in prison." Francis closed her eyes briefly, pain that had nothing to do with her physical injuries washing over her. "I never wanted this. I just wanted to live my own life, make my own choices." "This isn't your fault," Noah said firmly. "Walter made his own choices. You tried to reach him, tried to maintain a relationship despite his behavior. I know, Francis agreed softly, but he's still my brother, the only family I have left. Noah set aside the salve, taking her hands in his. That's not entirely true anymore, he said gently. You have me now, we're family. The simple statement brought tears to Francis's eyes. Yes, she whispered, we are. In the morning, they opened the dress shop as planned, though Francis wore a high-necked blouse to hide the bruises on her throat. The women of Willow Creek came in a steady stream, some genuinely interested in the new inventory, others clearly curious about the previous night's events, which had already become the talk of the town. Francis greeted them all with calm dignity, answering questions about the shop while deflecting inquiries about Walter. Noah stayed close by, taking the day off from his deputy duties to support his wife. In the afternoon, Judge Parker sent word that he wanted to see them regarding Walter's case. They found the judge in his office, looking grave as he gestured for them to sit. I've spoken with Walter this morning, he began without preamble. He's sober now and seems to understand the seriousness of his actions. The charges against him are substantial attempted arson, assault, threatening with a deadly weapon. Francis nodded, her heart heavy. What happens now? The judge steepled his fingers. Normally, these offenses would mean a significant prison sentence. However, given the circumstances, his state of mind, his previous good standing in the community, there might be another option. What kind of option? Noah asked. Walter has a cousin in San Francisco, a doctor specializing in troubled minds, Judge Parker explained carefully. He's offered to take Walter into his care, provide treatment for his condition. With proper supervision and care, the doctor believes Walter could recover his equilibrium. Francis felt a flicker of hope. So he wouldn't go to prison. Not if he agrees to remain under his cousin's care for a minimum of 2 years, the judge confirmed. And if you, as the victim, agree to this arrangement. Francis looked at Noah, seeking his opinion. His expression was thoughtful but not opposed. It's your decision, Francis, he said quietly. Walter is your brother. If you believe this offers him a better chance at recovery than prison would, I'll support your choice. Francis turned back to the judge. Would I be able to correspond with him? To know how he's progressing? Judge Parker nodded. The doctor has agreed to provide regular updates, and if Walter's condition improves, supervised correspondence would be possible. Francis considered this carefully. Prison would likely destroy whatever remained of the brother she had once known. At least with the doctor, there was hope for recovery, for Walter to find his way back to himself. I agree to the arrangement, she said finally, on one condition. Before he leaves, I want to speak with him, to say goodbye. The judge looked doubtful. Given last night's events, that might not be wise. She won't be alone, Noah assured him. I'll be with her the entire time. Judge Parker finally agreed, arranging for Francis and Noah to visit Walter in his cell that afternoon. When they arrived at the jailhouse, Sheriff Miller led them to the cell where Walter sat on a narrow cot, his head in his hands. He looked up as they approached, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. The wildness of the previous night was gone, replaced by a hollow exhaustion that aged him beyond his years. Francis, he said, his voice rough. I didn't expect to see you again. Francis stepped closer to the cell bars, Noah's steady presence at her back giving her courage. I came to say goodbye, Walter, and to tell you that I've agreed to Judge Parker's arrangement. You'll be going to San Francisco to stay with our cousin. Walter's surprise was evident. You're not pressing charges. No, Francis said simply. You need help, Walter, not punishment. Walter stared at her for a long moment, then dropped his gaze to his hands. I don't deserve your mercy. Maybe not, Francis agreed softly, "but you have it anyway, because despite everything, you're still my brother. And I remember the boy who taught me to ride, who read to me when I was ill, who protected me from schoolyard bullies." Walter's shoulders shook slightly, though he made no sound. When he looked up again, his eyes were wet. "I don't know what happened to me, Francis, after Mother and Father died. Something broke inside me. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just controlling you, hurting you." "I know," Francis said. "That's why you need to go with Dr. Lawson. Let him help you find your way back to yourself." Walter's gaze shifted to Noah, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. "Deputy," he acknowledged stiffly, "I owe you an apology as well for everything." Noah nodded once. "Take care of yourself in San Francisco, Lawson. Get the help you need." There was little more to say after that. Francis felt a complex mixture of emotions as they left the jailhouse: grief for the brother she had lost, hope that he might someday recover, and relief that the immediate danger had passed. "Are you all right?" Noah asked as they walked back toward the dress shop, his hand warm and supportive at the small of her back. Francis considered the question carefully. "Yes," she said finally. "I think I am, or I will be." The next morning, Walter left Willow Creek on the eastbound stage, the first leg of his journey to San Francisco. Francis watched from a distance as the coach pulled away, carrying her brother toward an uncertain future. It was a bittersweet moment, the end of one chapter in her life, though not the end of the story. As spring turned to summer, Francis threw herself into building her business. The dress shop thrived under her management, attracting customers from neighboring towns as word spread about her skill with a needle and her eye for fashion. Noah continued his work as deputy, earning the respect of the townsfolk for his fair-minded approach to law enforcement. They settled into married life with surprising ease, as if they had been together for years rather than months. Their small apartment above the shop became a true home, filled with laughter and love. In the evenings, they would often sit on the tiny back porch, watching the sunset and sharing the events of their day. "I received a letter from Dr. Lawson today," Francis mentioned one such evening in late summer, as they enjoyed the cooler air after a scorching day. Noah looked up from the book he had been reading. "What news of Walter?" "He's responding well to treatment," Francis said, a note of cautious optimism in her voice. "The doctor says he's begun to understand the sources of his anger, his need for control. It will be a long process, but there's hope." Noah squeezed her hand gently. "That's good news." Francis nodded, looking out toward the distant hills where the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Yes. I don't expect miracles, but knowing he's getting help, that he might someday find peace, it helps." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the simple pleasure of being together at the end of a productive day. Finally, Francis spoke again, her voice soft but certain. "I've been thinking about something, Noah. Something important." "Oh," he prompted, setting his book aside to give her his full attention. Francis turned to face him, her expression both nervous and determined. "When we married, it was partly for practical reasons so I could access my inheritance by the shop. We knew we had feelings for each other, but everything happened so quickly." Noah's brow furrowed slightly. "Are you having regrets?" "No," Francis said quickly, reaching for his hand. "Just the opposite, in fact. These past months have been the happiest of my life. I've fallen completely in love with you, Noah Yates, and I wanted you to know that even if we had met under different circumstances, even if I hadn't needed to access my inheritance, I would still choose you. Every time." Noah's expression softened, his gray eyes warm with emotion. "Francis," he said, his voice slightly rough, I've loved you since that first day when you stood on that porch with your head held high despite everything. I knew then that you were someone special, someone worth staying for." He pulled her gently into his arms, cradling her against his chest as they watched the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the distant mountains. "And I choose you too, every day, for all the days to come." As autumn painted the surrounding hills in brilliant reds and golds, Francis and Noah celebrated their 6-month anniversary with a small dinner party for their closest friends. Sheriff Miller was there, along with Mary Wilson and her new beau, the school teacher. Mrs. Holbrook had returned for a visit from her daughter's home back east, delighted to see how Francis had expanded the dress shop. "A toast," Sheriff Miller proposed, raising his glass. "To Noah and Francis. When you rode into town that day, Noah, I had no idea you'd be settling down so quick. But seeing you two together, it's clear as day you were meant to find each other." Glasses clinked as everyone echoed the sentiment. Francis leaned against Noah's side, contentment warming her from within. The path that had brought them together had been unexpected and at times painful, but she wouldn't change a moment of it. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Noah handed Francis a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. "Happy anniversary," he said with a slightly nervous smile. Francis unwrapped it carefully to find a leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the soft leather. "Open it," Noah encouraged. Inside, on the first page, Noah had written in his neat, precise hand, "For Francis, my heart, my home. May this be the first chapter of many in the story we write together. All my love, Noah." Tears pricked at Francis's eyes as she looked up at her husband. "Thank you, it's perfect." Noah's smile was tender as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I thought you might like to write our story, not just the parts we've lived already, but the parts still to come." "Our story," Francis repeated softly, liking the sound of it. "I think it's going to be a good one, Noah." His arms encircled her, drawing her close. "The best," he murmured against her hair, "and it's only just beginning." As winter settled over Willow Creek, bringing snow and cold winds, Francis and Noah's small home above the dress shop remained warm and bright. Business slowed with the weather, giving Francis more time for personal projects. She had begun using the journal Noah had given her, recording their daily life and her hopes for the future. One snowy evening in December, as they sat before the small stove in their sitting room, Francis cleared her throat nervously. "Noah, there's something I need to tell you." He looked up from the report he had been writing for Sheriff Miller, setting it aside immediately at her tone. "What is it?" "Is everything all right?" Francis smiled, her hand moving unconsciously to rest on her abdomen. "Everything is perfect, actually. I've seen Dr. Bennett today. We're going to have a baby, Noah, in early summer." Noah's expression transformed from concern to wonder in an instant. "A baby," he repeated, as if unable to fully comprehend the words. "We're going to be parents," Francis nodded, her eyes bright with happy tears. "Yes. Dr. Bennett says I'm about 2 months along. He expects everything to progress normally." Noah was on his knees beside her chair in an instant, his hand covering hers where it rested on her still flat stomach. "Francis," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, I don't even have words." "Are you happy?" she asked, though his expression left little doubt. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," he said, looking up at her with such love that her heart seemed to expand in her chest. "You've given me everything I never knew I wanted: a home, a purpose, a family of my own." He pressed a gentle kiss to her lips. "Thank you." Francis laughed softly. "I think we both had a hand in this particular development." Noah grinned, the boyish expression making him look younger than his 30 years. "Fair point," Mrs. Yates. As they sat together, making plans for the baby's arrival and dreaming of the future, Frances thought back to that day on the porch of Lawson's general store. Her brother's raised hand, Noah's intervention, those simple, powerful words, "No more." That moment had changed everything, setting her on a path she could never have imagined. Walter's actions, painful as they had been, had ultimately led her to freedom, to independence, to Noah, to the family they were now creating together. Life had a strange way of working out, Frances reflected as she watched her husband sketch ideas for a cradle he would build. From darkness had come light, from pain had come joy, from an ending had come the most beautiful beginning. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing Willow Creek in pristine white. Inside their small home, Frances and Noah Yates sat hand in hand, their future stretching before them like an unwritten page full of promise, full of hope, full of love. The story that had begun with a raised hand and a stranger's intervention would continue, growing richer and more complex with each passing year. There would be challenges ahead. Of course, parenthood would bring its own trials, and Walter's recovery remained uncertain, but Frances faced the future without fear. She had found her strength, her voice, her partner. Whatever came next, they would face it together. No more would she live in fear or under another's control. No more would she doubt her own worth or right to happiness. No more would she be defined by someone else's expectations or limitations. Instead, she would write her own story, page by page, day by day, with the man who had seen her courage from the very beginning. And it would be a story worth telling.